Welcome to Wheelock chapter 28. We get to learn a new mood in this chapter, the subjunctive mood, and talk about how it's used. So let's do just a real quick summary of verb moods. We want to start with indicative mood. That's what we learned first. I would describe the indicative mood as the mood of assertion. This is where the speaker asserts what is or is not. So indicative mood verbs can be positive or negative. But sometimes people have described the indicative mood as the mood of reality. But we just have to be careful with that. I'm okay with it, but even lies are assertions. Lies are indicative mood, even though they're not true, right? But grammatically, they would be indicative. So I do like the idea that with assertion, we're asserting things to be true or not. We may be lying. Also, when we ask questions, we're usually using indicative mood as well. So I just give you an example here with chicken because Chick-fil-A is one of my favorite places. And all of my kids have worked at Chick-fil-A. I eat more chicken. That is an indicative mood statement. That is an assertion. I do this. I eat more chicken. Now, imperative mood is the mood of command. This is where the speaker projects his will or desire on the addressee, the you. And so, eat more chicken is a command. It's an imperative. And then the subjunctive mood is the mood of potentiality. Here the speaker utters clauses with verbal actions or states that are possible, hypothetical, potential, contingent, or sometimes described as irreal. And we often use modal auxiliaries in English for this type of verb form. Auxiliary verbs like may, might, would, could, should, were, etc. And so an example here, I've given you three. I might eat more chicken. If I were a chicken, I'd run away. Right here, were is a subjunctive mood. And then we work that we may eat chicken. Here, may eat is my subjunctive verb there. Now, the goal for learning subjunctive mood in Latin is, first of all, to learn the morphology of subjunctive verbs. That is, morphology is how you form words. And then, two, learn the syntax of subjunctive verbs. That is, how to identify the way they're used in clauses and to understand the meaning associated with them. So let's start with the morphology of the subjunctive mood verbs. How do we form them? And we're going to be looking at present active subjunctives first. Now, the present tense is the first of four subjunctive mood tenses in Latin. In the subjunctive, we have present, imperfect, perfect, and pluperfect. We're hitting present in this chapter. The other tenses we'll catch in later chapters in Wheelock. But the basic principle here is that for indicative mood, if you remember, this is a review, we associate first conjugation, a verb like laudamus, we praise or are praising, with the vowel A. Notice that most of the time the vowel A is there on our forms of laudo in the present, active indicative. So second and third and fourth conjugation verbs, though, we associate them with the vowels E or I. So our second conjugation, moneres, is monemus. Ago's third conjugation, agimus. And then with audire, audimus. That's fourth conjugation. Now, for subjunctive mood, we're basically flipping these. The first conjugation will be associated with E, and the second conjugation, third conjugation, fourth conjugation will be associated with A. All right? So let's take a look at what happens when we do this. And I've got a chart here. This is first, second, third, and fourth conjugations. And then remember, we have third conjugation EO verb forms that are really third conjugation, but they look a lot like the fourth conjugation because of the extra I that shows up. So I've given you a gloss where assuming that this occurs, the subjunctive verb occurs in a purpose clause, which we're going to talk about later, you could translate these as that I may praise, that I may warn, that I may lead, that I may hear, that I may take. All right? But notice that there is an E in all of the first conjugation forms, which usually have A throughout, right before the personal endings. So you can repeat after me: laudem, laudes, laudit, laudemus, laudatus, laudent. For second conjugation, we're going to flip all these and use the letter A before our personal endings. So with moneo, it's moneam, moneas, moneat, moneamus, moneatis, moneant. For third conjugation, ago, notice we have the A's throughout here as well. Agam, agas, agat, agamus, agatis, agant. And with audio, our fourth conjugation verb, we have A's throughout. Audiam, audias, audiat, audiamus, audiatus, audiant. Then our third conjugation, eo verb capio, that I may take, that you may take, and so forth. Capiam, capias, capiat, capiamus, capiatus, capiant. All right, so this is really not that hard. The difficulty, of course, is in just remembering the rule here and remembering that we're flipping these forms. So it's going to be helpful to use this little mnemonic device here. We fear a liar. I love this. It was really, really appreciative of the Wheelock suggestion that for this type of mnemonic device, what we're seeing is these are the vowels that come before the personal endings in the subjunctive. First conjugation, second conjugation, third conjugation, and then fourth conjugation and third eo conjugation. These are going to use E, respectively, EA, A, or IA. All right? Let me go back here. Just one final thing, just as a reminder. If you recall, we have the old ant and trim rule for when the vowel that would normally be long has to shorten. Okay? Before NT and ND, vowels shorten when they come before those. Okay? And in any position. And then for T, R, and M, the vowel shortens if these are final and a vowel comes before and is supposed to be long. So if you notice, the M here is a trim consonant, the E is short. S is not a trim consonant, the E is long. T is back to trim, the E is short. Okay? And then NT, the E is short because NT causes shortening before it no matter where the NT is, whether final or not. And so you'll see that some of these A's over here are long, some of them are short, following the ant and trim rule. All right, now let's take a look here at this last note here. To distinguish present active indicative from present active subjunctive, you must remember the conjugation pattern, and you do that by knowing the second principal part, which is the present infinitive. If it's are, ere, ere, or ire, right? We'll know whether it's first, second, third, or fourth conjugation. And then you need to know how that conjugation is usually, forms in the indicative mood, so that you can contrast the subjunctive mood with the flipping of the vowel. Now, let's look at the present passive subjunctive here. The same vowel switch happens. Otherwise, we do what we normally do to form the present passive indicative, which is to switch passive endings for active ones. But we're going to be doing it on subjunctive forms rather than indicative forms. So, don't forget our memory device here for passive personal endings. In our restaurant, more and many enter. And that stands for our res-tur, more many ntur. Okay? And so here's the chart. We have our E's for first conjugation, right? And we're going to be using A's throughout the rest with the particular we fear a liar sort of vowels. So lauder, lauderis, laudetur, laudemur, laudemini, laudentur. And again, notice that the NT here is not final, but it still causes shortening of the vowel before. The R is a trim consonant, so it's got shortening before. Everywhere else, the E is long. But notice we have the E vowel, and then we have just the passive personal endings. And I could translate this in a purpose clause that I may be praised rather than that I might praise, because this is passive, not active. Now, we'll just read the forms here. So monear, monearis, moneatur, moneamur, moneamini, moneantur. And then we have agar, agaris, agatur, agamur, agamini, agantur. And then we have audiar, audiaris, audiatur, audiamur, audiamini, audiantur. And then with capio, capiar, capiaris, capiatur, capiamur, capiamini, capiantur. Now, in the translation paragraph here, I just note that I provide a purpose type of translation gloss for the subjunctives up above, that I may do such and such. Okay, but this is only one of many possibilities. And depending on the type of subjunctive clause it is in, we're going to use different translation values as we learn each of those different uses or syntax. So we can't always translate these as that I may do something. So let's look at two of the uses of the subjunctive. We'll start with the jussive subjunctive. Now, syntactically, most subjunctive verbs occur in subordinate or dependent clauses. They're going to be embedded in a main or an independent clause. However, occasionally, the subjunctive verb is going to occur in an independent or a main clause, and the jussive subjunctive is one of these. So, we're not looking for a dependent clause, but for a main or independent clause that has for its verb a subjunctive verb. Now, Wheelock suggests thinking through all of these uses in terms of a definition, how to go about recognition, and then how to go about translation. So we'll follow that pattern here. So definition, the subjunctive, the jussive subjunctive expresses the speaker's will for a first person or a third person subject to do something. So I'm the speaker. I want me or us to do something, or I want he, she, it, or they to do something. I don't use the subjunctive for jussive subjunctives if I want you to do something, because I use the imperative for that. I use the imperative for second person, right? But this is a way to provide a command or an exhortation for a first person or a third person subject to do something. Now, if you have studied Greek and Hebrew, you'll recognize this sort of grammar here. The first person jussive subjunctive in Latin is equivalent to the Greek's hortatory subjunctive and the Hebrew's cohortative form. And for third person jussive subjunctives in Latin, many Greek textbooks call that the third person imperatives, while Hebrew just calls it the jussive. All right, so those are terms that you may already be familiar with. Now, how do we recognize this? The subjunctive verb is going to be the main verb in the independent clause. And if it's negated, it will be negated with the negative particle ne. Now, how do we translate these? Commonly, one can use may or let, followed by the subject, and then the rest of the verb form. So, may he live forever, right? So there's the may or let, there's the subject, and then there's the rest of the verb, may live. Now, you cannot translate this as he may live, because that's a different meaning than may he live. When I say may he live, I'm expressing my will, my wish, my desire for this to happen. Okay, here's let us or let's live life. So let us, right, there's my subject. Here, my subject is in the contraction. Let us or let's, and then there's the rest of the verb, live. So that's how I would do the first person. So here are some examples comparing indicatives and jussive subjunctives. I give you the indicative first and then the subjunctive. So id facimus. Now these are not necessarily, my examples are not necessarily in Wheelock. I do use some of Wheelock's examples, but not here. Just trying to simplify things. So id facimus, this is the present active indicative of facio, and that's we are doing it, or we are doing this. Here I convert this to a subjunctive, and because this is a third conjugation verb, I'm flipping my vowel before the personal ending to an A. Faciamus. Faciamus. I'm sorry. This is a third conjugation eo verb. So id faciamus versus id facimus is an exhortation. Let's do this. Let us do this or do it. All right. Now here I flip back to the indicative. Id non facimus. Notice that in the indicative, if I want to negate, I use non. Right. Id non facimus. We are not doing it or this. But if I want to now use a jussive subjunctive, id ne faciamus. Here I've got that a for the subjunctive. It's let's not do this, or let us not do it or do this. Okay? And then for the last two examples, the first one's indicative. Discipulus discit is the student is learning, from discere, third conjugation. That's indicative. It's an assertion that this is what the student is doing, the student's learning. And then for discipulus discat, here I have the a indicating this is subjunctive. And it's may the student learn, or let the student learn. Here, as the speaker, I'm expressing my will for the student to learn. I'm basically imposing my will on a third person subject. So that's the jussive subjunctive function. Now, under point number 4, the second main use of the subjunctive is for purpose clauses. Now, we have a definition here syntactically. A dependent clause with the subjunctive verb can mark the purpose, reason, or goal of the main verb in the independent clause. So here's some English examples. We read, that's the independent clause, that we may learn. We may learn is the subjunctive form, and it's a purpose statement. This is why we read, that we may learn. We could also express this idea with just an infinitive. We read to learn, or we read in order to learn. So learning is the purpose of the reading. And then I have come, and have come is the main verb. Why? What's the purpose for coming? In order that you may rest. And here I've got a different subject that is doing the verb may rest here, and this expresses the purpose for my coming. Now, English can use dependent clauses or purpose infinitives to do this. In classical Latin, the infinitive is rare for this, and instead a dependent clause plus a subjunctive verb is used instead of that. Now, how do we recognize it? The subjunctive verb is in the subordinate clause, so there has to be a subordinate clause to have this type of subordinate subjunctive use. And it's going to be introduced, that subordinate clause, by ut, if the statement is positive, or ne, if it's negative purpose. And I'll give you some examples here below. But how will we translate this in English? Use either an infinitive, to or in order to blank, and you'll put the verb there. And you can only do this if the subject of the main verb is also the subject of the purpose verb. Otherwise, you're going to use a subordinate clause introduced by that, or in order that, or so that. So here are 3 examples in Latin. Hoc dicit ut eos iuet. Okay? He says this. That's my main clause here. And then ut introduces the purpose clause. Ut eos iuet. And I've given you the second principal part so that you know that this is a first conjugation verb, so that we can notice that the E here indicates subjunctive, right? That's subjunctive verb. So he says this in order that, this is third singular, the subject of the subjunctive verb is the same as the subject of the main verb. So I could use an infinitive here. He says this to help them, or in order to help them. Eos is my direct object. Or I could use a full dependent clause. He says this that he may help them. And I can use may help for my translation there. Now I'm using the same main clause in each of these examples. Hoc dicit, secondly, he says this. And now I have ne, which is introducing the purpose clause, but it's a negative purpose clause. He says this, ne eos iuet, in order to not help them, or that he may not help them. All right, so that's negative purpose. main verb action happens for the purpose of this not happening. And then hook dikit, he says this, ut, there's my purpose conjunction here, my subordinating conjunction, discipulus discat, from discere. Again, ere tells me this is third conjugation, but seeing the a here tells me it's subjunctive, right? So he says this, that, in order that, so that, okay, I could use any of these, in order that, or so that the student may learn. Now notice here that the subject of this verb and the subject of that verb are not the same. They're not equal to each other. And here I can't use an infinitive, a bare infinitive. I have to use a subordinating conjunction, and then I have to use this sort of a translation value. If I said he says this in order to the student learn, that doesn't sound like good English, right? So I need to switch to this subordinate dependent clause. All right, so hope that helps.